You're here because you want to get smart, fast, on the stuff that matters. Today, we're diving deep into something pretty foundational for any organization: governance, risk management, and control. GRC.
Yeah, GRC.
Think of this as your, let's say, express lane to understanding how organizations steer themselves, dodge threats, and, keep things on track.
Exactly. We've sort of distilled a whole stack of information to give you the crucial insights into GRC. At its core, it's about how an organization makes decisions right at the highest level. That's governance.
Yeah.
Then how it anticipates and deals with potential problems and missed opportunities. That's risk management.
Right.
And the specific things it does day to day to stay on course, those are the controls. And internal auditors, well, they spend a lot of time looking at how well these three things actually work together.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting with governance. It's interesting. The word comes from the Latin gubernare, which means to steer. That's the same root as government, isn't it? So just like a government needs to steer a country, an organization needs that direction.
That's a great way to put it, actually. Organizational governance is really the framework of policies, procedures, practices. It essentially dictates how an organization is run. It's the bedrock, you could say. And as we talk about this, keep in mind that internal auditors are, well, key players in evaluating if this bedrock is solid.
Evaluating if it supports the goals and, like, the legal stuff.
Exactly. Supporting the organization's goals and its legal obligations.
So who's actually holding the steering wheel in an organization? Who's responsible?
Typically, it's the governing body. Think of the board of directors, maybe trustees, the folks right at the top making the big calls. But it's not just about setting a course. They also really need to consider all the stakeholders.
Stakeholders. Like everyone affected by their decisions.
Precisely. Employees, customers, suppliers, the community. It's about responsible steering, considering the impact.
Right, you can't just set sail without thinking about who's on the ship and the wider world around you. The material also brings up checks and balances. Why are those so vital?
Checks and balances. They're essentially the safeguards against any one person or group having, unchecked power. Think of it like a seesaw. You need weight on both sides for balance, right?
Yeah.
So in a corporate setting, having a board with both executive directors who are part of management and independent non-executive directors ensures different viewpoints get heard. It helps prevent potential abuses of power.
So you get those different perspectives to keep things fair and heading in the right direction.
Precisely. And
Right.
these non-executive directors, they often form specific committees, like the audit committee.
The audit committee.
Yeah, they play a critical role in oversight, especially by working really closely with the internal audit function. And interestingly, in some places, like South Africa, for instance, regulations like the Companies Act and the King of the Fifth Report actually dictate how these boards must be structured.
They mandate it to ensure those checks and balances are really in place.
That's right. It's legally required in some jurisdictions.
Fascinating. So internal audit isn't just looking at governance from the outside, it's also kind of woven into the fabric itself. The sources mentioned a dual role.
Exactly. That's a key point. Internal audit provides assurance on governance matters. They're actually part of that overall structure, helping keep it sound. But they also provide assurance and advisory services on governance-related issues.
So they're like both a participant and an advisor, offering evaluations.
Yep. They conduct governance assessments to really dig into how effective those structures and processes are. And a crucial thing to remember, they always look at governance, risk, and control as a package deal. You can't really separate them.
Integrated. Okay, so governance is about steering. Now let's navigate into risk management. This sounds like it's all about spotting the icebergs ahead.
Haha, that's a perfect analogy, actually. Every organization has goals, right? Big picture, strategic goals, and day-to-day operational ones. Risk management is fundamentally about identifying anything that could stop them from reaching those goals.
And then figuring out what to do about it.
And then figuring out how to deal with it. Exactly. And the material points out that risk management happens at all levels, from shaping strategy right down to informing specific audit plans.
What exactly counts as a risk here? Is it just bad stuff?
Well, the definition is a bit broader than just bad stuff happening. A risk is any uncertain event that could have a negative impact that's your hazard or threat. But it can also be the flip side, a missed opportunity, something good might not happen.
Ah, okay. Like that student example in the sources.
Exactly. A student might risk not getting a grant because they failed their exams. That's a threat. Or they might risk not getting it simply because they didn't bother applying. That's a lost opportunity.
That's a really good way to frame it. It's not just avoiding the bad, but also actively chasing the good. How does this look for a company?
Very similar, really. An organization might face the threat of, say, a competitor launching a killer new product, potentially losing market share. That's a clear threat. But they also face the risk of not investing in their own R&D and therefore missing the opportunity to innovate themselves and capture new markets.
So they need to be proactive.
Absolutely. Proactive in addressing these potential risks through strategies designed to lessen their impact. That's what we call mitigation.
Mitigation, okay.
And we're seeing more and more organizations are using things like data analytics to try and predict and manage risks before they even happen, not just reacting.
Makes sense. So we've got the steering governance, we're scanning for hazards and missed chances risk management. Now we need the control mechanisms, the lifeboats and navigation systems maybe.
Exactly. Control is the third piece of the GRC puzzle, and honestly, it's a huge focus for internal auditors. The sources use some good everyday examples, like checking your change at the store, using a bike lock, even your home thermostat.
Right, things we do all the time to make sure things go as planned.
Precisely. Those are all controls we use personally to minimize risks and get a desired outcome.
So within a company, it's the same idea, just scaled up for business objectives.
Exactly right. Organizational controls are the specific policies and procedures put in place to minimize those risks that could stop the organization from achieving its objectives. And the sources stress a few things here. Controls need to be implemented properly, they need to be monitored regularly to make sure they're still working.
And they don't guarantee success, right? Just increase the odds.
Precisely. They provide reasonable, not absolute assurance that things will go according to plan. It's about managing risk down to an acceptable level, not eliminating it entirely.
Reasonable assurance.
Oh.
Okay, that's important. It accepts that things aren't perfect. Now, to really get into the nuts and bolts, the COSO framework was mentioned. What is COS, and why is its framework so central to understanding control?
Right, COSO. It stands for the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. It's a highly influential group. Back in 1992, they put out this framework recognizing that strong internal controls are just essential for running an organization effectively and ethically. Their framework gives a really structured way to think about and implement controls. It's built around 5 interconnected components. Think of it like the DNA of a solid control system.
Okay, let's decode that DNA then. First up is the control environment. What's the blueprint here?
The control environment is the foundation. Everything else rests on it. It sets the overall ethical tone of the organization. It influences how aware people are of risks and how seriously they take controls. A huge part of this is the tone at the top.
Tone at the top. You mean leadership?
Exactly. The demonstrated commitment by senior management to integrity, ethical values, and effective control. Their actions really do speak louder than policies written down somewhere.
So if they cut corners, everyone else might think it's okay.
Pretty much. If leadership prioritizes integrity and accountability, it makes it far more likely the rest of the organization will too. It's not just having a code of conduct, it's seeing leadership live by it and enforce it.
So it's about leadership walking the walk.
Yeah.
What else is part of this control environment?
Well, the sources also mention senior management's philosophy and operating style, how they approach planning, organizing, directing, controlling. Are they proactive? Reactive? Do they encourage open communication? And of course, the explicit focus on integrity and ethical values, usually formalized in that code of conduct we mentioned, but crucially, it needs to be enforced when someone steps out of line.
Okay. The second part mentioned under control environment was organizational structure. How does structure play a role in control?
The structure provides the sort of framework for how activities are planned, carried out, monitored. It needs to fit the organization. A small tech startup has a different structure than a giant multinational, obviously.
Makes sense.
A clear structure defines lines of authority and responsibility, helps information flow where it needs to go for decisions, and groups activities logically so things get done efficiently and people are accountable.
Right. Getting the right scaffolding in place helps build everything else on a solid foundation. Okay, component 2 of COSO, risk assessment. We touched on this earlier under risk management, didn't we?
Yes, we did. Within the COSO control framework, risk assessment is specifically the process of identifying and analyzing the risks relevant to achieving the organization's objectives. It's about understanding what could go wrong or what opportunities might be missed, assessing how likely and impactful they are, and then figuring out how to respond. This assessment directly feeds into designing the control activities.
Which brings us to number 3, control activities. It sounds like where the action happens, the actual policies and procedures.
Exactly. This is the rubber meeting the road. Control activities are those specific actions embedded in policies and procedures that management sets up to make sure their directives are followed. They directly help mitigate the risks identified in the risk assessment. They happen everywhere in the organization at all levels.
And the sources mention key versus secondary controls.
Right. Key controls are the primary ones aimed directly at significant risks. Secondary controls are important too, but they often support the key controls or address less critical risks.
Okay. And there are different kinds of control activities. Preventive, detective, corrective. Can you give us a quick rundown?
Sure. Think of preventive controls as trying to stop errors or problems before they happen. They're often the most cost-effective.
Like what?
Things like hiring trustworthy people in the first place, segregating duties so one person can't do everything, requiring proper authorization for transactions, good documentation, physical security like locks and guards.
Okay, those seem like sensible precautions. What about detective controls then?
Detective controls are designed to find errors or irregularities after they've happened. If they slipped past the preventive ones, they're like a safety net.
Examples.
Things like management reviews of performance reports, doing reconciliations, comparing different sets of records to spot discrepancies, independent checks, even analyzing customer complaints can be a detective control. They signal that something needs looking into.
So preventive blocks it, detective spots it, then corrective must be about fixing it.
Exactly. Corrective controls are the steps taken to fix the errors or irregularities that have been detected. And importantly, they also aim to prevent them from happening again.
So maybe changing a procedure or retraining staff.
Precisely. Revising procedures, additional training, maybe even disciplinary action if it was intentional.
Okay. The source also broke down control activities into specific types, like segregation of duties. Why is separating tasks so fundamental?
Segregation of duties, or SOD. It's a cornerstone of good control. Why? Because it makes it much harder for one person to both make a mistake and hide it, or to commit fraud on their own.
How does it work?
It involves splitting key functions between different people. The classic example is handling cash. The person authorizing a payment shouldn't be the same person who actually makes the payment, or the person who records in the books, or the person who has custody of the cash itself. Separating those roles creates built-in checks.
Makes total sense. What's next on that list? Proper authorization.
Right. Proper authorization is about ensuring transactions and activities are approved by someone with the appropriate level of management authority before they happen. It helps ensure resources are used correctly and actions align with the company's goals. You typically have general authorization for routine things.
Like ordering regular office supplies.
Exactly. That might fall under general authorization based on preset limits, but then you have specific authorization for bigger, riskier, or unusual things.
Like writing off a huge amount of obsolete inventory.
Perfect example. That would likely need specific high-level approval, maybe even from the board, depending on the amount.
Okay. Then there's adequate documents and records. Seems basic, but crucial, I imagine.
Absolutely critical. Good documentation provides the evidence, the audit trail showing what happened, when, why, and who was involved. You need things like pre-numbered documents so you know none are missing, records prepared promptly while details are fresh, enough detail to actually understand the transaction, and signatures or electronic approvals to show who authorized or processed it.
Got it. Moving on. Safeguarding of assets and information. Protecting the company stuff.
Exactly. Protecting both physical assets, inventory, equipment, cash, and also intangible assets like critical data, intellectual property. This involves physical security, like we mentioned, but also things like insurance, and importantly, controls over who can access sensitive information, both physically and increasingly digitally.
Makes sense. And the last type listed was independent checks. Why double check things?
Independent checks means someone not involved in the original activity reviews it periodically. It provides an objective look. Are procedures being followed correctly? Are controls working as intended? Are errors being caught and fixed? It's a vital quality control step.
Okay, that covers control activities quite thoroughly. The fourth COSO component, Information and communication. It's not enough just to have controls if nobody knows about them or getting the info they need, right?
Precisely. This component stresses the need for relevant, reliable, timely information to flow up, down, and across the organization. People need the right information to carry out their responsibilities, including their control responsibilities. Senior management needs to clearly communicate expectations about controls and ethical behavior.
So everyone's on the same page, basically. And the fifth and final COSO element is monitoring. This implies controls aren't a one-and-done thing.
Not at all. Monitoring is the ongoing process of assessing the quality and effectiveness of the internal control system over time. Are the controls still working? Are they still relevant, given changes in the business or the risks? This can happen through regular management activities, separate evaluations like internal audits, or a combination. The key is ensuring the control system stays effective and adapts when necessary.
So who is ultimately on the hook for making sure all this control stuff works?
Well, the governing board, the board, has ultimate oversight responsibility, but they delegate the day-to-day job of establishing and maintaining effective internal controls to management. So, management designs, implements, and runs the control system. They're accountable for its effectiveness.
And where do internal auditors fit in this accountability chain?
Internal audit's role is distinct. They provide independent assurance to the board and management on how well that system is working. They assess if the controls designed are adequate for the risks. That's adequacy assessment. And then they test if those controls are actually operating as intended. That's effectiveness testing.
And if they find problems, weak controls.
They report their findings, especially significant weaknesses, to senior management and usually directly to the audit committee of the board as well.
The source mentioned a table clarifying the different roles: management, external audit, internal audit.
Yes, that's helpful. Management owns and operates controls. External auditors focus mainly on controls relevant to financial reporting as part of their opinion on the financial statements. Internal auditors take a broader view, looking at the effectiveness and efficiency of the overall control system in relation to all sorts of risks.
Okay. And what happens if internal audit identifies a risk that management seems okay with, but the auditors think is just too high for the organization?
Good question. The source explains there's an escalation process. The chief audit executive, the head of internal audit, should first discuss it thoroughly with senior management. If they still feel the level of risk being accepted is inappropriate or unacceptable for the organization and management won't change course, the CAE has a responsibility to communicate that concern directly to the governing body, the board, or its audit committee.
So there's a mechanism to ensure the board is aware of major disagreements about risk levels.
Exactly. It ensures ultimate oversight.
Now, all these controls sound great, necessary even, but are there downsides, limitations we should know about?
Oh, absolutely. It's crucial to understand that internal control, no matter how well designed, isn't foolproof. It provides reasonable assurance, not absolute. There are inherent limitations. People make mistakes, faulty judgment, simple errors. Collusion is a big one. 2 or more people working together can often override controls designed for individuals acting alone.
And management overriding.
Yes, management can sometimes override prescribed policies or procedures. While sometimes necessary for legitimate reasons, it can also be abused. Plus, controls cost money and time. You need a cost-benefit balance. And you can definitely have too much control.
Over-controlling, how so?
Yeah, where the controls become so cumbersome and bureaucratic that they actually slow things down, stifle initiative, and make the organization inefficient without adding proportional benefit and risk reduction. Finding the right balance is key.
So it's about being smart with controls, not just piling them on. Okay, finally, the source touches on controls in an IT environment, obviously huge today. How does control work there?
Hugely important. IT systems underpin almost everything now. Processing transactions, storing data, communication. The basic control objectives ensuring things are complete, accurate, authorized, valid, they stay the same. But how you achieve them in an IT system looks different from manual processes.
And auditors need to check these IT controls specifically.
Absolutely. Assessing IT controls is a critical part of modern auditing because if the IT systems aren't reliable, the information coming out of them isn't reliable.
The sources mentioned 2 main types: general controls and application controls. What's the difference?
Think of general IT controls, or GITCs, as the foundation for the entire IT environment. They apply broadly across systems and data. Examples include things like how the IT department itself is organized, segregation of duties within IT, having standard operating procedures for backups or change management, good system documentation, controls over developing new systems, physical and logical security over hardware and data access.
So the overall IT infrastructure and management.
Exactly. These general controls have to be strong because the application controls rely on them.
Okay, so what are application controls then?
Application controls are built into specific software programs. They're designed to ensure the data processed by that particular application is complete, accurate, authorized, and valid. Like input validation checks, making sure you enter a number where a number is required, or checking if an invoice number already exists, or automated checks for authorization limits within a purchasing system. These are specific to the software, but again, if the general controls are weak, say, anyone can easily change the software code, then the application controls might not be reliable either.
So auditors need to look at both layers.
Definitely. You can't really assess application controls without understanding the strength of the general controls they depend on. Given how reliant organizations are on IT, assessing these controls is absolutely critical.
Wow. Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into governance, risk management, and control. It's really clear how these three GRC elements aren't just separate boxes.
Not at all.
They're deeply interconnected, woven together. Essential for any organization that wants to succeed and, stick around.
Exactly. Understanding GRC gives you a really powerful lens. You can look at almost any organization and get a better sense of how it operates, where its strengths might lie, and maybe where potential vulnerabilities are hiding.
It feels like really practical knowledge.
It is. It applies across the board, different industries, different types of organizations.
So for you, our listener, as you go about your day, interacting with different companies or organizations, maybe think about what you've heard today. Reflecting on those interactions, what aspects of their governance or their risk management or their controls seem most obvious, or perhaps most concerning based on what we've discussed. Definitely some food for thought there.
Absolutely.
And if any particular part of GRC sparked your interest, maybe the COSO framework or IT controls, we hope you'll dig a bit deeper. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.